So, Theodore, what do you do for work?
Oh, I'm a delivery driver at a flower shop.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and some of our customers aren't human.
What?
I'm not exaggerating when I say that, by the way. When I say some of our customers aren't human, I mean I'll be delivering tulips to a nice elderly couple on one stop and a family of three-headed squid monsters on the next one. My order sheet never tells me which is going to be either. Although, if I'm delivering something like a houseplant covered in ice, I can usually make an educated guess. And God forbid you get any of the delivery instructions wrong in my line of work too. I ran into a were tigress who damn near ripped my head off when I accidentally delivered a graduation bouquet to the house next door. She later called up the shop and told them I ruined her daughter's special day. The way I got this job was really nothing special. I was down on my luck, saw a posting on ZipRecruiter, drive your own car, be your own boss, make $75 per day, and thought, well, let's see where this goes. When I pulled into the parking lot of that dingy little back alley building where they made all of their arrangements, I grabbed my nice, freshly printed resume, adjusted the floral print suit I wore for the occasion. Don't judge me, I was desperate and walked in the door of Southwest Sunset Floral Arrangements. To be fair to them, it looked exactly how you expect a kitschy local business to look. I saw buckets of flowers, two young ladies stocking shelves with vases and potted orchids, and the woman who would in a few minutes become one of my supervisors. Welcome to Southwest Sunset, she said with the same intonation I assume she greeted every customer with. Is there something I can help you with today? The woman whose name I would later learn was Anna was heavy set and middle aged, wearing a tie dye shirt, denim overalls, large hoop earrings, and pointed leopard print glasses straight out of a Far Side cartoon. One of her Converse sneakers was untied. I suddenly felt overdressed. I came here for the interview. She blinked. Interview? I called yesterday? I said, gesturing awkwardly to my resume. About the driver position. She smiled bright and warm like a kindergarten teacher. Yes, here's the application. She handed me a form to fill out. Once you finish that, bring it to us with your license and proof of insurance, and we can get you scheduled on a route. My eyebrows flew up. You're just going to give me the job? She gave me an oblivious smile. What else will we do? I don't know, I said. Most places interview you first. Not here, she said, shaking her head. Interviews are boring. Besides, we already have everything we need. I shrugged, choosing to ignore the red flags this cryptic statement raised. All right. I filled out the application, and Anna handed me a contract to review and sign. I'm not a fool. I read it thoroughly, and to be fair to them, they were perfectly transparent about the risk of this job. The contract stated things such as neglecting to follow delivery instructions could result in injury, death, or metaphysical curses. Do not take tips from clients with horns or wings, and all wilted flowers are to be delivered to the mole at the end of your shift. I have been through so many jobs at this point that I assumed it was just some sort of gimmick to show new employees how fun it is to work for them, the way a lot of places with millennial HR managers do. I signed it and returned to Anna's office. When I walked in, I found Anna speaking with a bald man wearing a blue check print button up tucked into gray slacks. His back was turned to me, so I couldn't see his face. Anna heard me come in and peeked around him to look. Ah, Thank you for filling that out, she said when she saw me, another kindergarten teacher's smile on her face. She nodded to the man in front of her. Nautilus, this is Theodore, our new driver. I began to wonder why someone would name their child Nautilus. The bald man turned around, immediately answering that question. His whole head was an octopus. I mean, genuinely, like a nerdy version of Davy Jones. Round spectacles over his little beady octopus eyes, tentacles where his beard should be, a rubber fitness watch wrapped around his wrists just above his shrimp feelers that served as his fingers. Theodore, Nautilus said with something approximating a smile appearing between his tentacles. He reached out for a handshake. Nice to meet you. No one had ever taught me how to react when you meet someone with an octopus for a head. I thought about it, remembered the things I saw during my brief stint working at KFC, and decided I've seen worse. I shook his shrimp feeler hand. Theo is fine. Theo, he said, tendrils wriggling as he spoke. I'm Anna's husband, Nautilus. We own this shop together. Nice to meet you, Nautilus. I said stiffly, feeling like I disassociated into some sort of walking fever dream. I glanced back at the contract that I just signed, reread a few of the clauses I had dismissed as fiction minutes before. After the sudden realization that humanoid squids exist, I found myself viewing them in an entirely different light. I have to pause here to defend myself for a minute. Most people who found themselves in a situation like this would rip the contract in half, walk out the door, and never look back. There were more red flags than red roses in that shop. But for me, this was the best opportunity I've gotten in months. You see, most employers you interview with will hear ADA accommodation and throw your resume in the trash. I have been slowly losing my ability to walk for the last 10 years, and for one reason or another, this progressive disease has invaded every facet of my life, to the point of holding down a job has become nigh impossible. And don't get on my case in the comments about applying for disability either. I got denied 2 times, then denied by an advocacy agent 2 times, then denied by 2 lawyers who didn't think I would have enough of the case until after I was in the wheelchair. So, until I end up a true paraplegic, I'm stuck jumping from one shitty part-time job to another and barely scraping by. These 2 folks want to hire me for a daily job? Fine. If I don't take it, I'll die of starvation anyway. In the moment, I tried to rationalize it. I had been struggling for so long that I desperately wanted this to be a good opportunity. After all, they were friendly, happy to see me, and they seemed keen for me to start. Maybe they really were just a pleasant middle-aged couple who own a flower shop, and the only reason they sped me through the process is because finding people willing to drive flowers to Lovecraftian horrors is understandably difficult. Just a few struggling small business owners who need a delivery driver. I wanted so badly to make all of these excuses for them, but I recalled what Anna said. Besides, we already have everything we need. One look in her eyes, and I could tell she knew why I was there. She knew I was desperate enough to agree to this. Nautilus gestured to the piece of paper in my hand. Did you have any questions about the contract? I glanced at him, then at Anna. For a moment, the ruthless, calculating soul that resided behind her cutesy exterior was visible through her eyes, staring expectantly at me. I nodded, resigned myself to my fate, and turned back to Nautilus. Several, I said, but I'm willing to ignore them. Wonderful, Anna said. her ever-present smile widening even further. I handed her the contract, which she scanned into her computer with a copy machine from the 90s that might as well have coughed when she turned it on. In a few minutes, they printed out a route sheet for me. I was packing my car with arrangements of mostly normal flowers. As Nautilus handed me a last bouquet, he stopped me on my way out. "Remember," he said, patting my shoulder, "always read the delivery instructions." There was a seriousness in his tone that told me I should take this advice to heart. My dad's a lawyer. I lied. I know how to read the fine print. The first route they gave me was small, just 3 stops. I sat down in the driver's seat of my purple 2013 Kia Soul and punched them in on my phone's GPS. A bouquet of roses with added chocolates for one Lord Satanicus M at a nearby legal office, one funeral bouquet for Rosa N, and one stinking nightshade houseplant for Melissa B at a mobile home park called Bloodshed Acres. Searching for Bloodshed Acres on Google Maps predictably didn't yield any results. So I did as I was told and read the instructions. Take exit towards, left turn on, turn right on, continue straight, exit vehicle at 10th stop sign, walk north into the desert 50 paces, wash hands in the unholy water and knock 3 times. When the gate opens, return to your vehicle and drive into the park for delivery unit number. I briefly wondered if I might face eternal damnation for performing this ritual, but my stomach growled, reminding me of my more immediate need for grocery money. I shrugged, arranged my route on the GPS to as few miles as I could pare it down to, then headed out. The legal office was on the east side. I've decided to refrain from making the obvious joke about someone named Laura Satanicus being a lawyer in the post, but the rest assured, it did occur to me when I pulled into the parking lot. Feel free to make your own version of the jokes in the comments, as I'm sure it'll be funnier than whatever I thought in the moment. Anyway, I rolled up to the entrance, roses and chocolate in hand, and took a picture of the flowers in front of the address number. I have to do this for every bouquet as proof of delivery. When I walked inside, I was greeted with the most normal-looking legal office I've ever seen. Big mahogany reception desk, attorney names engraved in gold, Times New Roman letters on the back wall, a few plush armchairs, and a coffee station in the corner to serve as a waiting room. Here's the problem though. I knew who this lawyer was. Not personally, but everyone in my hometown knew his name and face, since his advertisements were plastered everywhere. You know those local lawyers who have billboards everywhere telling you to call if you're in an accident and you want some money for it? Yeah, that kind of guy. If his name were Lord Satanicus, I would have known, because it would be stamped in all capital letters onto every other bus stop and billboard in the city. I checked for any delivery instructions, and there were none listed for this one on the order sheet. My error here was simple. When Noctilius told me to read the instructions, I assumed those instructions would be clearly labeled and no one at the shop would ever make any mistakes. I put down the rose bouquet, then opened my trunk again. The stinking nightshade was still where I packed it in, wedged between a few towels and some boxes they'd given me before leaving. I checked the tag for Melissa B on the nightshade, then the tag for Lord Satanicus on the rose bouquet. I chuckled. Southwest Sunset really was just like any other dead-end job I worked. They tell you an important rule, they make enough mistakes that it's impossible to truly follow it. It was almost charming. I switched the tags, then brought the rose bouquet inside to the receptionist, whose name, as I had correctly guessed, was Melissa. "It's for my husband, for our anniversary," she told me. "We've been married 30 years today." The smile on her face lit up the room like a ray of sunshine piercing through storm clouds. And for a brief moment, this job felt rewarding. That bright smile right there is why I included this little diversion from my otherwise spooky story. I made Melissa's day. Remember that for later, because what I'm about to tell you next is something that would make most people walk out on this job. I'm not talking about the delivery to Bloodshed Acres, by the way. It was nothing special. Following the directions went off without a hitch, and it turns out Lord Satanicus was just an average demon in his early 120s. He answered the door wearing plaid pajamas with holes in them and smelling like a college dorm room, a Nirvana song emanating from somewhere in his living room. He was a burnout, and stinking nightshades is like saliva for demons. A pretty normal delivery, as I will find out over time. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to tell you about Rosa. The chapel was in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, buried in the desert several miles of dirt road ahead from the nearest strip mall. It looked like a repurposed schoolhouse that hadn't been renovated since the 70s, with cracked sidewalks and a chain link fence that had been warped by the sun and ripped up with wire cutters from kids ditching class. No one answered the door, but it was unlocked. I took a picture in front of the address number, then entered, hoping to find someone with whom I could leave these large baskets of lilies. The interior was just as neglected. The linoleum floors were covered in skid marks and yellowed with age, and the walls, painted an ugly blue color, were covered in symbols which I would later learn were Enochian letters. Some of the display cases, once used for elementary school projects, now contain wooden crucifixes decorated in whatever color pieces of junk they stumbled across. Starbucks wrappers, shredded Pokemon cards, really anything you might find in an abandoned school that had been cleaned out by squatters. I glanced through the window at the other end of the hall, which led to a playground outdoors. The paint on the steel jungle gym was faded and chipping, and years of exposure to the desert sun had cracked and bleached the plastic seat on the swing set. To my surprise, there were a few people playing in the playground. 4 of them, all elderly, all nude, except for the white and purple sashes around their necks. Despite their withered muscles and arthritic fingers, they were swinging around on the jungle gym, laughing and taunting each other like children in a language I had never heard before. After a few seconds, they noticed me watching. Immediately, they went silent. They got off the jungle gym and the swings, then stood stationary in the playground, arranging themselves in a row at the edge of the sidewalk and staring at me. They didn't approach, didn't speak to me, didn't even move, just stared. The air suddenly felt hostile. I muttered an apology to no one in particular and turned around to leave. I nearly ran into another elderly woman standing mere inches behind me, giving me a similar menacing stare. I hadn't heard her approach. The realization punched me in the gut. I hadn't read the delivery instructions. With trembling fingers, I pulled the order sheet out of my pocket. The instructions were in the same language written on the walls. I rubbed my temples. Of course. They tell me to follow the instructions, then write them in a language I can't fucking read. I glanced at the walls, then, without any other ideas, I showed the instructions to the woman in front of me. She read them, nodded, then gestured for me to follow her. Without knowing what else to do, I silently obeyed, funeral lilies in hand. The woman led me to what I reckon used to be a school cafeteria. It was populated by 4 more elderly individuals, dressed, or rather undressed, in a similar fashion to the folks on the playground. They had gathered around a cafeteria table, which they covered in purple and white satin that matched their sashes. One woman, whom I guess must have been Rosa, lay on the table, hands crossed over her chest, and pale as death. My guide gestured to a platform behind their makeshift altar, one of five, the other four of which were already populated with other arrangements of lilies, white roses, and hydrangeas. I placed mine in the remaining empty spot, and as I did so, got a better look at the altar. Several votive candles surrounded Rose's corpse, all completely burned down, with yellow wax dripping off the satin and onto the floor. The elders were arranged in a circle around Rosa, one standing by each of her limbs, with platforms of flowers behind them. My guide took her spot in front of the platform she led me to, right by Rosa's head, then picked up what looked like a hairbrush. The other four were holding odd-looking shower scrubbers. When I finished, my guide nodded to the group, and they all placed one hand on Rosa, each grasping a leg, an arm, and her head. They started humming what sounded like a warped Gregorian chant, harmonizing perfectly in a pentatonic scale. My guide began brushing Rosa's hair, and as she did so, whole clumps of it fell away from her head, taking with it pieces of her scalp. I staggered backwards, clasping a hand over my face and stifling a yelp. The other elders took their implements to Rosa's body and began to scrub. I realized their tools didn't have bristles. They were coated in razor blades, shedding Rosa's skin until it smoothed off her body and slapped onto the floor. As they did so, Rosa opened her eyes and began screaming, an inhuman, warble howling emanating from somewhere deep within her lungs. Her blood, soaked into the satin beneath her, somehow turned purple as it spread through the cloth, then dripping onto the floor in puddles of vicious, violent ink. I'm not ashamed to say I ran out of there. I felt sick. My stomach roiled in disgust, and I peeked behind a prickly pear bush on my way back to my car. When I finished hacking and coughing, I looked down at the mess to find a puddle of thick, violet ink. I covered my face again, but immediately pulled my hand away when I felt the wet fluid against my fingertips. They were stained purple. With my clean hand, I opened the passenger side of my car, halfway sitting down in the seat with my feet still hanging out of the side. I fumbled to open the glove box, took out a few of the napkins and hand sanitizer I kept stored in there, and furiously scrubbed away as much ink as I could. I grabbed a bottle of water, swished some of it around in my mouth, then spat it onto the ground, repeating this process until it was no longer purple. I sat there, trembling, eyes wide for an intermediate amount of time. The ritual I'd just seen wouldn't stop replaying in my head, leaking through every attempt to push it out of my mind like the violet ink that had stained those sheets. When I finally remembered to blink, I realized the sun was setting. The drive home was long. I spent the entirety of it wondering how my life had led me to this point. How many choices I had made, why I made them, why they wouldn't have even mattered, why I was always destined to end up here. I used to believe in free will. I don't anymore. The circumstances of your life will be what they are, knocking you around like bumpers in a pinball machine until you eventually end up in the gutter. The trajectory of our lives was decided the moment the universe came into existence, and my trajectory led me to a cult compound in the middle of the desert, watching a woman get torn to pieces in an esoteric ritual I could never hope to understand. The choice to continue driving for Southwest sunsets was never my own. It wasn't made by my desperate circumstances either, although they may have led me here. It was made by one bright smile from a middle-aged receptionist in a scummy accident lawyer's legal office. When I walked into my dingy government-subsidized apartment, I received a text message from Anna. "Can you come in tomorrow?" I sighed. "Sure. What time?"